Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I make videos on a broad range of topics from science to history to religion. So if you are interested, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron so I can continue to make higher quality educational videos. So with that said, let's begin. In today's video, we will be giving a brief overview of undoubtedly one of the most popular deities of ancient Egypt, Osiris. So let's begin. Glory be to Osiris, the great god within Abydos, King of eternity, Lord of the everlasting, who passes through millions of years in his existence, eldest son of the womb of Nut, Lord of the crowns of the north and south, Lord of the lofty white crown. Thus begins one of the most famous hymns to the god Osiris found in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Being present in all levels of Egyptian society, from the monarchy to popular religion, Osiris was a god of death, resurrection, agriculture, fruitfulness, and fertility. The meaning of the god's name and his exact origins are enigmatic. The etymology of the name Osiris comes from the Latinization of the Egyptian word Usir, U-S-I-R. The name has many different spellings, such as A-S-A-R, A-U-S-A-R, or A-U-S-I-R, or even W-E-S-I-R or U-S-I-R-E. The exact etymology is confusing because of the abbreviated hieroglyphic spelling of his name. As you can see on the screen, the I hieroglyph makes the sound ear, and the throne hieroglyph makes the sis sound, and the last hieroglyphic sign, the seated figure, is called a determinative. In this case, it denotes the name of a god. It can also denote the word that has to do with a god. A recent study concluded that the most plausible meaning of his name is Mighty One, or in Egyptian, Useru. For simplicity's sake, though, we are going to be using Osiris throughout the rest of this video. His birthplace is said to be in the town of Rosetu, in a necropolis on the western desert near Memphis. The location may simply be a mythical placement related to the god's funerary role, but we can't rule out that there may be something to the placement beyond that. If you have any theories, you can feel free to leave them in the comments below. In iconography, Osiris is almost without exception represented in an anthropomorphic form as a human mummy whose skin may be white to symbolize the mummy wrappings, and sometimes he is depicted with blue skin. More usually, though, he is depicted with black skin, the symbolic color of chthonic deities, and of the dark Nile floods, or with green skin, representing vegetation and fertility. He is also sometimes depicted with a broad collar on his neck. The god is virtually always depicted standing or sitting stiffly erect with both legs together, with his hands extending from his wrappings, holding a crook and flail, which are his chief attributes. These items of regalia were originally thought to represent pastoral implements, but the flail's origin is unclear, so it may have had other meanings. Sometimes the god holds what is called a vast scepter, but this is clearly a later usage taken from the depictions of other gods. Starting in the Middle Kingdom period of Egypt between 1255 BCE and 1650 BCE, Osiris was frequently shown wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, and this crown is found in Osiris' iconography throughout all later periods. Another crown closely associated with the god was called the Etef crown, which is identical to the white crown but is depicted with two feathers attached to either side. This crown appears to have originated with an obscure god named Enjeti, who may have been an early form of Osiris. There is a unique association between Osiris and the symbol known as the Dejet column, or also known as the Dejet pillar. He is routinely shown in the form of this Dejet, sometimes as a semi-personified pillar with human arms, or as an anthropomorphic mummy with a Dejet pillar head. What is interesting is the actual death of Osiris was never depicted in Egyptian art. Perhaps it was not theologically appropriate to show the scene, but Osiris is frequently shown lying on the funerary bier with Isis and Nephthys usually standing to either side of the bier mourning. Osiris is depicted as enthroned more than any other deity due to his connection with the pharaoh. In funerary scenes, the deceased is shown before the enthroned Osiris, often supported by Isis and Nephthys. But during the Middle Kingdom period between 1550 BCE and 1069 BCE, Osiris became increasingly unified with the solar god Re, and so was occasionally depicted with a synchronized form of Osiris-Ra or Ra-Osiris. This fusion takes the form of a mummified body of Osiris with the head of a falcon, a ram, as you can see in this fresco in the tomb of Nefertari in the Valley of the Queens, or sometimes a beetle. Osiris developed throughout Egyptian history. It appears likely that Osiris was originally a fertility deity with chthonic connections, based on his identification with the earth. At some point, he became associated with the Nile's inundation as well, perhaps through the Nile's annual flooding and the fertility of the land that resulted from the flooding. Osiris and his association with agriculture seems to have occurred later in Egypt's history. As time progressed and the cult of Osiris spread throughout Egypt, the god assimilated many other deities and soon took on their attributes and characteristics. Many of the epithets given to Osiris were shared with other deities as well. From the ancient jackal god Khneti-Mnetiu of Abydos, Osiris took the title foremost of the Westerners. From Anubis, he took the title He Who Is in the God's Tent, which is relating to the temporary booth set up for embalming the dead. Many of the titles and epithets applied to him also reflect the god's nature as a funerary deity, which, if not original to Osiris, certainly became central to his identity. The most common among these titles is Wenefer, from which the Greek name Onophraios was derived. The word probably means something like he who is in everlasting good condition, showing Osiris's post-mortem power. His seemingly anonymous title, Lord of the Living, is also a purposeful denial of death and refers to those, quote, living in the netherworld, unquote. An important development of Osiris, however, which went beyond his primary identity as a resurrected god and the ruler of the underworld, was the role he played in as judge of the dead. When we look at the pyramid texts, it depicts Osiris as of primary importance as one of the three most frequently mentioned deities alongside the god Horus, who was the sun, and Ra, the sun god. When Osiris rose to widespread importance, the priests of Heliopolis in Lower Egypt decided to incorporate him into their own theological framework. The legends of Osiris incorporated Osiris' siblings Isis, Nephthys, and Seth, as well as his son Horus, and developed into the most extensive mythic cycle in ancient Egyptian culture. and I may do a dedicated video on the whole mythic cycle at a later date. The core myths, though, were preserved by the Greek writer Plutarch in his work De Isidae et Osiridae, or On Osiris and Isis, published around 100 CE. In his work, Plutarch essentially euhemerized Osiris, meaning he claimed that the god once ruled Egypt as a human king until he was murdered and violently dismembered into 14 pieces and scattered by his jealous brother Seth. Due to the loyalty and dedication of his wife Isis, and with the help of their sister Nephthys, Osiris's parts were found and he was resurrected. Then he became the god of the netherworld. Isis then became pregnant while resurrecting Osiris, and she conceived and bore their son Horus, who avenged his father's death by defeating Seth, and in time became the king of all Egypt as a rightful heir to Osiris. This story had greater appeal both as a theological justification for the legitimacy of the Egyptian pharaonic system, in which the deceased king was equated with Osiris and was followed to the throne by Horus, his successor. The story also offered the hope of immortality through resurrection, which had an obvious universal appeal, and was accepted first by kings and eventually by nobles and commoners. On the contrary, it is also true that as a chthonic god, Osiris retained a level of fearsomeness that could be regarded with awe. We can see in the pyramid text the lines preserve his darker aspect of the god and spells that imply the king's protection from Osiris by Ra. This can also be seen in the coffin text. And the coffin text stand in contrast to the pyramid text, where the coffin text dealt with the subterranean elements of the afterlife ruled by Osiris, instead of focusing on the celestial realm of the pyramid text. And the coffin text speaks of Osiris as a threatening power in some cases. And the Book of the Dead, however, includes both the god's positive titles, but also lists epithets such as the Terrible. With that said, the human aspects, vulnerability, and resurrection of the god, along with the emphasis on family devotion and loyalty found throughout Osiris's myths, meant that Osiris was viewed as a benign deity who represented the clearest idea of physical salvation available to the Egyptians at that time. Outside of the Osiris myths themselves, however, Osiris was associated with several other deities. For example, the Ba, or soul of the god, was thought to reside in the ram-headed god Benebjedet, which was worshipped in the Nile town of Memphis. Very little is known of this god, but he appears in a story from the reign of Ramesses V, who ruled between 1149 and 1145 BCE during the 20th dynasty, telling the story of the contendings of Horus and Seth, in which Benebjedet plays an important role in counseling the gods to see the advice of Neith, whose judgment in a dispute is eventually followed. Another deity that is associated with Osiris was the Apis bull of Memphis. The Apis bull was normally associated with Ptah, but was later seen as a manifestation of Osiris. A complex and particularly important relationship existed between Osiris and the sun god Ra. Although Osiris was incorporated into the Heliopolitan theological system at a relatively early date, the god continued to grow in importance until, by the New Kingdom between 1550 BCE and 1069 BCE, his position as an independent god was considerable, as we can see in titles which were applied to him, such as Lord of the Universe ruler of eternity, and king of the gods. Osiris's position became, in fact, comparable to that of the sun god himself. He came to be regarded not just as a counterpart of Ra in the netherworld, but also in some cases as the sun god's own body. It got to the point that Osiris and Ra came to be considered as representing the body and soul, respectively, of a single great god. The theological solar cycle was thus imagined as the Ba of Ra descending into the underworld to unite with Osiris as his own corpse. At the same time, though, Osiris and Isis remained independent gods with characteristics, identities, and realms. Osiris also had a minor association with the moon, but not much more is known beyond that. The Greeks associated Osiris with their own god Dionysus, but the most well-known fusion of Osiris with other deities occurred in the reign of the Greek pharaoh Ptolemy, the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty, who reigned 305-304 to 282 BCE. He introduced the hybrid Serapis as a fusion of mainly Osiris and Apis, but also including a few Greek gods. He became one of the most important deities of Egypt at the end of the dynastic age. And I may make another dedicated video on the history of Serapis at a later point. The veneration of Osiris lasted continuously in Egypt for well over 2,000 years. It was already well established by the end of the 5th dynasty when the god's name appeared for the first time in both the pyramid texts and in inscriptions in private mastabas. The 5th dynasty lasted from approximately 2498 to 2345 BCE. And in the modern era, his adoration has seen a delightful resurgence in popularity. Throughout Egypt, Osiris had many cult centers where he was venerated. Due to the legend of his bodily dismemberment, a number of sites claimed pieces of Osiris's body and were thus at least locally important centers of his worship. For example, Athribis claimed the god's heart, and Biga, Edfu, Hieroglyphs, and Sebennytus all claimed one or more pieces of his legs. The most important sites linked with Osiris were Abydos and Busiris. The two locales were his chief cult centers in Upper and Lower Egypt, respectively. Abydos, which was anciently known as Abju, had the oldest known sanctuary of Osiris. The 6th dynasty pharaoh Pepi I, whose exact reign is unknown, but he ruled in the 24th century BCE or early 23rd century BCE, constructed a funerary chapel in Abydos, which evolved over the years into the great temple of Osiris, the ruins of which still exist within the town enclosure. Busiris, a town located in the Middle Delta, was the Lower Egyptian sister city of Abydos, and its ancient name was Dedju. The later Greek name Busiris means house of Osiris, and the temple of Osiris at this site was also early, as it is mentioned during the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE. Inscriptions in the cult center state to contain the burial of the god's backbone. The worship of Osiris was just as diverse in form as it was widespread in its extent. In the area of funerary practice, the god was honored in many different ways. Although the prayers for offerings were at first addressed to Anubis as early as the Old Kingdom, by the 5th dynasty, however, Osiris had assumed an important role in private burials, and the funerary texts came to reflect this with the standard opening of, quote, an offering given to the king, to Osiris, the lord of Busiris, the great god, the lord of Abydos, unquote. Of interesting importance was at the instant of death, a deceased individual of every class came to be identified with Osiris, being called the Osiris, and the person's name was added to that of the god. Another interesting aspect of Osiris's worship was the utilization during the New Kingdom of the so-called Osiris beds. These Osiris beds were hollow frames constructed in the form of Osiris and filled with earth, usually Nile mud, in which grain seeds were planted. The frame was sometimes wrapped in linen sheets to complete the appearance of the effigy. The corn grown was seen as a powerful symbol of the resurrection power of Osiris. We also see Osiris worship in the annual festival of Osiris at Abydos. In this festival, the cult statue of Osiris, which resided in the temple, was carried from his temple to his traditional tomb in the area known today as al-Kaib, or Mother of Pots, from the countless cups, jars, bowls, and other pottery offering vessels left by ancient pilgrims. A stele was discovered dating from the Middle Kingdom of an official named Iconofret. The stele, now in the museum in Berlin, describes aspects of this festival and is instructive in a clear stress placed on the mysteries of the god, which were extensive even by Egyptian theological standards. Unquote. Osiris being one of the most popular deities, his influence spread beyond the confines of Egypt, as Egypt became absorbed by various other empires, such as the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and finally the Romans. His worship was found as far removed from Egypt as the British Isles, due to his close link to the cult of Isis, who offered her followers a form of physical salvation based almost entirely on her role in the mythical drama of Osiris. This brings us to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed learning about Osiris. If you did, consider subscribing to be notified about upcoming content. And I'll see you in the next video.